Many modern day vehicles have driving technology and features that make the overall driving experience much better. But unfortunately, we don't always learn and make good improvements. There's a lot of technology and features in a lot of these modern day vehicles that are a literal disaster. I'm going to share that list with you so you can go out there armed with the information to avoid some of the worst technology and features. Let's get into it now.
Life's too short to drive boring cars.
Right here we have one of the end-of-the-line drivetrains you're going to find with a Toyota vehicle. And what we have here is a transversely mounted 4-cylinder engine. But what you won't find under this hood of this 4-cylinder is a turbocharger, which you're finding in a lot of modern-day vehicles. That's right, this is 2.5 liters, naturally aspirated, and it makes 200 horsepower. A growing trend we're starting to see are a lot of manufacturers equipping vehicles with much tinier engines and then throwing turbochargers on them. We're seeing Chevy doing that with 3-cylinder engines in some of their Buick products, and as well as some of their Blazers. They're throwing turbochargers on 3-cylinder engines. Even Honda and their 1.5 liter turbo 4-cylinder engine and the oil and fuel dilution issues, because small displacement engine coupled with high compression and as well naturally we have direct injection means it's a recipe for disaster, and they end up pushing too much fuel past the piston rings and end up with oil and fuel dilution challenges and naturally early engine deterioration. Because what you're doing is overheating the engine. You're putting a lot more pressure in the combustion chamber, thus creating the perfect recipe and storm for early engine failure. And turbochargers can create a lot of benefit, obviously high performance, better fuel economy, but usually I would leave that to the track. For a vehicle that you want to keep for a long period of time, often many turbocharged engines have a vastly reduced lifespan. And unfortunately, Toyota themselves is learning the hard way. They've now gone ahead and replaced some of their 3.5 liter V6s that were known to be ultra reliable with a turbocharged 2.4 liter 4-cylinder engine, and they're replacing some of their outgoing V8s that were 5.7s and 4.6s, now replacing with a 3.4 liter twin turbo V6. And now they're finding a lot of problems. So for people concerned with longevity, reliability, and durability, often the naturally aspirated engine, that's in other words no supercharging, no turbocharging, is the ultimate best way to go for long-term reliability. And as we see, the growing trend is smaller and smaller displacements and more turbocharging, and coupling that up with another technology which isn't that great, and that's the CVT transmission, and we'll talk about that shortly. And at the end of the day, this growing trend of small displacement 3- and 4-cylinder engines replacing their old tried and true reliable naturally aspirated larger engines is a growing trend that's sure to reduce the overall lifespan of the vehicle and make them throw away way before their time. Another growing trend in a lot of modern day vehicles, which we're starting to see more and more and more, has to do with the electronic shifter. Yes, here we have a relatively late model Toyota, and they're keeping it simple. We still have a mechanical actuated shifter lever here for their automatic transmission. But unfortunately, a lot of modern day vehicles are now using rotary dials. We're seeing that in Dodge, Ram, Jeep products. We're also seeing that in products like Jaguar. And as well, when you look at a lot of manufacturers like Tesla, they even incorporate some of their shifting right here on the large display. The problem with that is when it gets extremely cold outside, which it can, and it does in a lot of northern states and Canada, often that display starts to act strange and often doesn't work. You go to try to shift your vehicle and it's minus 30 inside, good luck and for that to work. And ultimately, you're putting a lot in the hands of electronic technology, large screens, and as well as those rotary dials or more switches and electronics. We know those are on borrowed time, and we also know that the supply chain often brings us a second grade quality of some of those components, and all we're doing is putting all of that reliance on the weakest link. That's right, the lowest common denominator and the quality of that shift set right there. And another growing trend and technology that you're finding in a lot of modern day vehicles are around the safety technology. And when you look at modern day vehicles, they're loaded with sensors. You'll have sensors up front, sensors here, sensors there. You'll have sensors often tucked in the lights and sensors on the side, and they're all very important for a function of these vehicles. And so if any one of those sensors malfunctions, you can imagine when you're relying on the park assist technology to actually work properly, and it doesn't. Because when you're trying to rely on a bunch of electronics to safely park your vehicle in between lines or a parallel park along the roadside, you're putting a lot of faith in that electronics to park your car safely, A, to not hurt somebody, and B, not to damage your $30,000, $40,000, $80,000 vehicle. It's a technology that is fun to watch, fun to play with, but at the end of the day, Not too many people are actually using it, and if you have to pay extra, don't bother. It's one of those features I wouldn't just skip, I'd run from. And another safety feature, which I truly believe removes the autonomy from the driving experience. There was a time when we personally controlled the driving opportunity. We have our hands on their steering wheel. We use our feet on the gas and the brake pedal, and we actually rely on the driver to actually take over and move this vehicle down the road safely. That's why we get trained, we get retested, and we have to certify. But unfortunately, a lot of this technology now is buried into the vehicles to try to take over that role of accountability and responsibility of a safe and defensive driver. And what we're talking about here is something that a lot of these vehicles nowadays have sensors here in the dash, whether it's up by the mirrors or in the windshield or down here somewhere. And it's monitoring me, it's watching my eyes. So as I'm driving down the road and it's keeping an eye on me like this, it's looking for behavior like me sleeping. So it's ultimately monitoring your behavior. If you're falling asleep, if you're losing attention on the wheel, the idea is that technology will illuminate a light on the dashboard warning the driver to wake up, and move aside, pull over, take some time off, take a break, whatever it is. It's there to monitor. Now, while that seems like a great idea, more and more of this technology people are leaning on and relying on to safely drive. The same thing goes with backup cameras. Gone are the days of actually knowing how to use your mirrors. People often use that technology because they can't properly back up. People are becoming more reliant on this technology, and as a result, this is a failure and one that I just don't like. Another technology that's making its way to the mainstream, and we're starting to see it actually imposed. As of 2025, there's certain markets, i.e. in the UK, that are starting to implement the technology of speed limiting. That's right, you could be driving down the road, minding your own business, and all of a sudden there's some slow traffic or maybe a dangerous maneuver and you need to accelerate to possibly get around that. But we all know that there's times where you feel like you have to maybe slightly exceed for a short period of time. Now, I would never advocate for speeding, but there are those moments where you feel like if you start to accelerate and the vehicle shuts you down, that's even more dangerous than you can imagine. Because what it does now is it uses some of those sensors that are looking for the driver attention sensors and a whole host of other technology that's going to be mandated to put into every new vehicle coming in 2025. It's going to ensure that you as the driver driving down the road, if you should exceed the speed limit for a designated period of time, you will be shut down. The vehicle will slow you down, and you'll then will have to be accountable to find a place to pull over, slide back into traffic, and do so safely. They're doing that to actually start to slow people down, control the traffic flow, and it could ultimately result into a speeding ticket mailed to you personally. So the speed limiter technology is coming to a country near you in years coming up very, very soon, and certain markets are seeing it already. Another feature that actually drives me bananas, and I believe a lot of you are going to feel the same way, is a technology which feels very invasive. When you're driving your vehicle along on a sunny summer day and you pull up to a red light, the vehicle stops. And then you go to accelerate and it just jerks back to life. Yes, that's your start-stop program. And a lot of vehicles, sure, you have the push button here, that's to start-stop it, but often you're able to disable it on the dashboard. But there are some vehicles you still cannot disable, and it comes factory preset and set up so you cannot override it. But the start-stop system is designed to reduce fuel emissions, fuel economy improvements, and of course, just overall reduce the engine running time. But in reality, in most cases, what it does is create extra wear and tear on the drivetrain. As it starts up, the starter can see additional wear. The engine, if it sits long enough and it almost becomes a cold start, becomes more additional wear and tear. But ultimately, it's just abrupt and quite shocking at times when it restarts. Sometimes you don't even feel it turn off. And then when you go to set off back at a green light, you feel that judder as it decides to start the engine again. It's very abrupt, slightly annoying, and certainly one that if you have the ability to turn it off on your dashboard, I always do that first thing. Another type of technology which I don't care about all that much are the types of controls. You get a lot of capacitive controls on the dashboard of a lot of modern day vehicles. You get a lot of haptic controls which become very smooth. They look great, but they are very difficult to operate. Unlike this Toyota, which has definitive buttons, which makes life easy. You also have definitive controls here. But in a lot of modern day vehicles, these controls controls don't exist. And while the touchscreen looks wonderful, if you want peripheral devices you want to control, maybe you want to see the engine performance or some deeper diagnostics, that's great to have that type of available technology. But many car manufacturers, from JLR, for example, Jaguar Land Rover Group, put a lot of controls inside that touchscreen. We also see it in BMW, Mercedes-Benz puts way too much technology into that screen. Tesla is another one that uses way too much technology and controls, and it's all wrapped up in their center screen. And that puts a lot of onus on that screen to do its job properly. The unfortunate part is, already mentioned, when you hit cold temperatures like we do in a lot of these northern states in Canada, it's not uncommon to get minus 20, minus 30, minus 40 degrees Celsius. And those temperatures are enough to stop the function of a lot of these technologies. You get capacitive controls, haptic controls, and as well, touchscreens just don't work like they should. And as a result, you're guaranteed to have failures, technology glitches, and of course, even just the failure of one of those components is enough to leave you stranded. Especially, as we mentioned, some of the automatic transmission controls in there, or you want to control just heaters and knobs. This is a great technology. What's wrong with keeping things simple? Knobs, buttons, very simple tech like this is enough to keep this vehicle reliable and practical. So like I said, it's great to have that party trick buried in the screen, and it's great to look at some extra technology that isn't fundamental to the driving performance of the vehicle. The basic functionality should always be available through physical knobs and buttons. There's some other technology that I'm not sold on either, and quite frankly, I could take it or leave it, and that has to do with gesture and proximity controls. A lot of vehicles nowadays actually have the ability to open the trunk. You just got to wave your foot around like that, and often the trunk will automatically open. But I've had vehicles like a Mercedes-Benz that does not open every time. I actually look quite foolish trying to wave my foot around to get the trunk open, and it never does. Because sometimes the calibration or the sensor locations or just the programming itself isn't conducive to reliable operation. Now, sometimes people say, no, you just do it like this, and then they correct you, but it's almost like you have to hold your tongue slightly to the left and tilt your head 3.5 degrees southwest, and then you get the good to go. But that's not what I want. I want easy. I walk up and it works, and it doesn't always work. So some of these proximity controls don't work great. And on top of that, there's another one inside that when we open and we look inside these vehicles, BMW's rocking some of these controls, and a lot of their stereos now actually have what they call gesture controls. So instead of just turning up the volume like here, this is a standard garden variety knob. It works every single time. But BMW has everything buried in the technology within that screen. But some of these manufacturers are now using gesture controls where you can just use your finger like this, turn up the volume, turn down the volume. But I've used those systems, and again, it's almost like tilt your head the right way, put in, poke back, twist, and you're good to go. Because sometimes you've got to have your hand in the right place. You've got to be doing the right motion at the right speed. Otherwise, it's flaky too. So quite often, a lot of these proximity and gesture controls, I'm not a fan of. I love good old-fashioned quality knobs that are built well, that are good for 1,000,002 operations. That's all I need. And another feature, which I'm not too much in love with, and BMW started the trend, a lot of other manufacturers are taking that up now, and it has to do with the tires like we see right here. Now, these ones here are not that style of tire, but the tires in question that we're talking about are run flats. Run flats are tires made so that you can drive on them for a period of time at a certain speed to get you home. If for some reason you pick up a nail or you damage the tread of your tire, you're able to safely drive the vehicle home or to a repair shop and get it fixed. But there's a caveat. Number one, first of all, you can't exceed 50 miles an hour or 80 kilometers an hour. You can't exceed 80 kilometers running distance, typically under 60 miles to get you to the shop. And because the sidewalls are heavy duty to allow you to drive on them, they often make a lot more noise. The tire itself is a lot heavier than a standard garden variety tire. They're also heavily reinforced, and technically you're not supposed to fix them, although I've had tire shops do that for me on a favor. You're not actually technically supposed to patch and plug a run flat tire. Once they're damaged, you're actually supposed to replace them. The problem is, if your tire is below a certain percentage, say for example, your tires are all sitting at 60% wear, you'd probably drive another 3 seasons to get the most life out of your tires, because they're also double, triple the cost of a standard tire of the same size. So you're trying to maximize the life, but in doing so, running on 50, 60, or maybe 70% wear often is below the threshold. So if you go and have to replace one tire, if it's front wheel drive, you need to replace the pair. If it's all-wheel drive, all 4 tires need to be replaced if it's below that certain threshold, usually in that 50, 60, or 70% wear, because it can mess with your rear differential, your front differential, transmission, and the overall balance of the vehicle. So getting something as simple as a little nail in that front tire can end up costing you thousands of dollars. I'd rather have a spare tire in the trunk and deal with that slight little bit of inconvenience and having that hardware buried under there, rather than the slight convenience but the extraordinary cost that comes with a run flat. The next technology or feature that you're going to find in a lot of modern vehicles, because it's a relatively late model, modern day vehicle kind of technology, and that has to do with not just the engine, which we've already spoke of, but it has to do with some other components. I mean, when you look inside a vehicle, that shifter right there is what drives that engine's power to the wheels and moves that vehicle down the road. So often the transmissions don't get quite the airtime in terms of problem areas, but certainly they deserve it, because a lot of transmissions are problematic. This one here is a 8-speed torque converter automatic transmission, basically what 95% of the vehicles on the road are using these days. But as time goes on, there's more and more conversion to these different types of transmissions. Some people don't like dual clutches, some people do for the speed, as well as manual gearboxes or other options. But the one in question that I absolutely can't stand, and I wish they didn't have, were what they call the CVT, continuously variable transmission, which is essentially in most cases a series of belts and pulleys, a constant moving up and down through the shifts to maintain that certain engine speed. Many argue that it's actually more efficient than most of its competitors, even from the torque converter. The downside is many of them make noise, they burn, they smoke, they fail. And specifically when you're talking about transmissions in vehicles like Nissans with the Jatco transmissions, they often fail exclusively in a big way. $3,000–4,000 to repair, and even the standard maintenance is quite pricey on them. They don't drive very well, they sound whiny and buzzy, they can make noises, and honestly are very not inspiring to use. So very few manufacturers actually get the CVT right, whereas Toyota uses a set of planetary gears, and they're actually a better, more durable system. But at the end of the day, CVT transmissions are not inspiring, maintenance intensive, and quite frankly, a little short-lived. Another growing feature and technology, or it's more of a styling cue, are what you're seeing on a lot of modern day vehicles. As I circle around here, I'm sure it's becoming very evident. Fake vents. There's nothing real there. Fake there, really very little. I mean, you get some airflow through there, more fake vents right there. And on a lot of modern day vehicles, you'll find more fakeness at the back. A lot of times fake, it's styling, sure, but it's fake. And a lot of vehicles, although this one here is not guilty of it, we actually see a set of legitimate real stainless steel exhaust tips right here, which is actually rare, because part of the issue is a lot of modern day vehicles, look at Audis for example, especially on their base model vehicles, you'll look at the back of these units and you'll often see just a cutout, and it's just a fake little mesh piece on there, and they're actually not even exhaust tips. It'll have this fake surround, but there's actually nothing popping out there, and then you don't even see the tips. When you see manufacturers like Porsche and they've got all these vents and gaping holes, it usually has some form of function behind it. There's usually a radiator to cool a transmission, or radiator to cool the gearbox or engine, or some other feature, cooling air or inlet air to the engine. There's always some feature or reason for it. So if it actually is for function, that's perfect. But the problem is so many manufacturers try to dress up these cars and it ends up looking even cheesier. When you look at Honda Civics, for example, some of the kings of cheese when it comes to actually pouring on those fake vents. A lot of manufacturers are doing it though. Please go away. Keep it clean, keep it tidy, unless it's actually functional. And another one are what BMW sort of started the trend, and we're seeing more and more of it. Let's take a quick look in here. Open that, and you'll see features like heated steering wheel right there. You get the button, and that makes it cozy in the wintertime. Heated seats. Also a nice feature to have. Navigation on the screen there. And many of the features that are in there. There's technology, there's modules, there's the wiring harnesses to get from the front to the back to power a lot of these components. But unfortunately, manufacturers like BMW and many others now are getting on the train of subscriptions, where even though the hardware is there, you have to pay a monthly $12, $15, $40 a month to enable a lot of those functions. That's where the buck stops here. As soon as I get word that the vehicle has some form of subscription tied to some of its core features, I'm out. It's done. And with all of that said, you want to learn some of the worst vehicles on the planet? We're talking about SUVs, cars, sports cars, you name it. I give you the whole list. It's long, but it's very concise. Hope to see each and every one in the next one. We'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.